Hi everybody, today we're going to start dismantling the tractor here to take out the clutch and renew the clutch. So the first thing we done here was to spray all the bolts and screws with WD-40 a week in advance, so as it penetrates into the screws and make sure that everything is as easy as possible to loosen down. So we're going to start off with taking off all the screws on the tin work. Both sides, and then we'll start dismantling all the connections in and around the clutch. We need to separate the fuel lines, the steering rod arm, and a couple of other connections in and around the clutch. Okay, so we have the bonnet lid off. The next thing we're going to do is to disconnect the electrical connections on the starter motor and the alternator. Then we're going to shut off the fuel supply here on this fuel tap and go around the far side and disconnect some connections around there. Okay, so this separation of the ball joint on the drag link was a bit of a problem. When I was slacking off the nut and that and trying to tap it back, it wouldn't move. So I was at that for ages, hammering and battering at it. So eventually put some heat on a small gas torch in around this link arm here, and it went out easy enough then after that. So showing these connections here on the fuel filter. This is the secondary fuel filter. So there's two connections. There's a feed and return line, and then there's another line here at the top that goes back to the fuel tank. That's also taken off. The exhaust pipe has been removed, and the temperature sender unit here on the side of the block has also been dismantled. And on this side here, we've disconnected the fuel supply line that goes round to the far side to the main filter. So the next thing we're going to do then is get ready for propping underneath. Make sure everything is safe and secure, chock the black wheels, and then start to remove these bolts. Okay, so we have jacked up the back part of it, and then we also have a trolley jack on the front, so we can pull it backwards and chock up between the axles and the front part of the frame. This is to stop the engine rotating once the engine and the wheels, the front half of the tractor, are moved forward. Okay, so the tractor has now been separated, so it's just a matter of taking out all the bolts around the flange and then gently pushing it using the wheels, turn the wheels, and keep everything in line while you pull it out. So these fuel lines have been party balloons put on the end of them to stop any dirt, dust or whatever getting into them. And the problem with this clutch is this finger here is broken. So whenever we push down the clutch, it wouldn't disengage the clutch and kept on driving, which is quite dangerous. So we're now going to put in 1/4-inch bolts into these 3 holes here first. It's important to put them in before we take off these 6 bolts here, because that's under tension here. These springs here are trying to push this plate outwards. So what we need to do is get these screws in here first, make sure they're taking up the tension. They don't have to be overly tight, just comfortable. Once we have all them 3 in, then we'll take off these 6 bolts and then the whole clutch will come out. That's the release bearing. It's quite worn looking, so we'll get a new clutch kit which will come. This release bearing will come with the kit. Another thing I done here was, as I took out these bolts, they're set on the ground on a piece of cardboard in the order, starting from the top, working downwards. So as you can see, there's different lengths of bolts, and one of them is a smaller diameter as well, so just a good idea to try and keep everything in the order come out, so when we go to put it back together again, we know where everything fits. Okay, so this is the old clutch here before it's removed. So the first thing to do here before you start taking off any of these 6 bolts going in and holding the clutch here is to put in these screws here. These are 1/4 inch, and I happen to have a wing nut just under the head here because the bolt is slightly too long. The only reason I have a wing nut is that's all I could find in the toolbox at the time, so you just put an ordinary hex nut in there, tighten it in as far as you can go, not overly tight, and then just do up this nut here to take the load of the springs that's pressing out. So it's important to do that on 3 places here first, to make sure that you don't, once you start slackening these here, if you haven't got these here in properly, these here can pop off, actually break a bolt. So that's the main important thing there. So the next thing we'll do then is take off these 6 bolts here and then remove the whole clutch from the flywheel. Okay, so we're going to take out these 6 bolts holding this flywheel here. So before I take off these bolts, I've marked them with a pen marker, including the tabs. So whenever I go to screw this back in again, I'm going to put it back in the way it came off. So here we have the flywheel off here now. So looking at the teeth all the way around, they seem to be good enough order, so that's a good sign. However, looking at this around the bell housing, it's quite wet, and it looks like we're going to have to take off the bell housing and renew that oil seal on the end of the crankshaft. So that's going to be our next piece of work. Here we have the oil seal removed now, and as you can see there's a gasket here at the back. So that gasket, along with the rope seal on the main carrier for the crankshaft seal, will also need to be replaced. So here's the flywheel off here now at the minute, and we're just going to pop this bearing through from this side here. So I've already hammered it out, and it'll just pop out here now. So what I've done here is I've cleaned out the bearing housing and put a small amount of oil into it to enable the new bearing to be popped in easier. So that'll just sit in there, and then we'll just tap it in nice and gently, evenly all the way around till we get it fully home. Okay, so here we have the old release bearing on the carrier, and not sure if you can see it or not, but there's grooves worn on the carrier, and then in the new one we have packed it with grease into the groove. So it's important to do that to make sure it slides in and out. So the next thing we're going to do here now is take out this old oil seal. So as you can see, the existing oil seal sits down slightly below the top surface of the aluminium housing. It's meant to sit up just slightly protruding, according to the spec. I think it's in around 1.5 to 2 millimeters. So that possibly may have been the cause of the leak on that side. This is the top half here. Again, it's sitting down slightly as well, so not sure what the exact cause of the leak. Sometimes they can leak across this joint here, but more than likely it's probably worn and also coming out through that slate recess there. So on the back of this housing here we can see some traces of the old gasket material stuck to the back of the housing. So that needs to be all sanded off. And I've taken out the rope seal there now and cleaned out that groove. So when you get all that cleaned, nice and clean for good mating surface for the new gasket. Also check the top surfaces here where it meets together. Okay, so here we have the oil seal housing, and I've had the rope seal sitting in oil for about 3 days now. So we're going to start pressing the seal into each half of the housing. The manual says to leave 0.01 to 0.02 of an inch, or 0.254 to 0.508 millimeters sticking out each end. That was the original style of gasket that was in the housing, but I went and got this newer style here that's not split, with the thought that there's less chance of leaking past a joint. So we're going to go ahead now and try and fit these seals in. So here we have the seal pressed in. So I started at one end here and just left about a half a millimeter sticking up. Pressed that in firmly with the handle of the hammer, and then worked my way around to the other side until approximately the same amount sticking up. So they say that you shouldn't cut the seal, it's cut to the right length whenever you buy it, so a bit of an effort to push it in, but I greased the groove before I put it in, and soaking it in oil also helps to get the slide in, so hopefully that's it sealed properly now. Okay, so what I've done here is I've put on the two halves of the oil seal housing and tightened up both screws on the top here, just to get everything seated in properly before I go putting in the gasket at the back. I'm going to take it apart now and just check that seal one more time, make sure it's all sitting properly, and then put on the gasket and tighten in all the screws. So this is the seal taken back off again now, so hard to focus on this, but it is just tightened in perfectly here, so slight amount sticking up. So the other half is the same, so that tells me that everything is compressed together properly and hopefully there should be no leaks. So here we have the oil seal fully tightened up. So the way I done this was I put on the gasket seal, then the gasket, then more sealant between the housing and the gasket. Put in all the screws, tighten them all up, and then took out one at a time, put thread locking compound onto it, and then tighten it up to 19 foot-pounds with a torque wrench. Now, I'm not sure if 19 foot-pounds is the correct torque. Went by this chart here for the 5/16 UNC bolts, grade 5, which is 8 to 19 foot-pounds. So went in the middle of this here, so I'm not sure to say what grade these bolts are, but that's what I done anyway. So all the bell housing bolts are done up, torqued up, and as each one was torqued up, it's marked with the yellow marker. Also I have the flywheel here sanded around the face right there to get all the glaze off. So we'll put on the flywheel next. So that's the flywheel on now. All the bolts have been Loctited and torqued up to 75 foot-pounds. A bit of a tricky thing to get on that flywheel because of the weight of it, but there's a small hole, a spare hole here on the flywheel that lines up with a corresponding hole on the flange on the end of the crankshaft, so use that for locating a bolt while you're lifting the flywheel on, so it acts as a a pin to help you center it. Also, the release bearing, or throwout bearing as some people call it, has been installed. New springs put in as well. And then there at the bottom, a bit hard to see, there's a split pin has been installed. That's to keep that hole clear, wiggles around, keep that drain hole clear. If any oil does happen to leak into the housing here, it can drain out. So the next step now is to put on the clutch. We have our clutch aligning tool here, and the shims have to go on as well first. Okay, so the clutch has been lined up with the alignment tool, and bolts have been put in to all 6 of the fixing points temporarily. So what I'm going to do now is take out each one in turn, put locking compound on the thread and tighten it up to 20 foot-pounds, which is the recommended torque according to that chart. So all the bolts are torqued up. I actually torqued them to 35 foot-pounds, and now we're taking out the transport bolts. That's these small bolts here, 3 of them. Make sure you take them out because they actually hold the clutch in together. So the clutch is on now, and the next step here after taking all the bolts out is to check these screws here and fingers. So the screws at the back here are for the PTO. So we just put in a feeler gauge here, make sure that that's the right gap. The Massey Ferguson workshop manual says that has to be 0.09 of an inch plus or minus 0.002. That works out at around 2.3 millimeters. Then the fingers are adjusted. I've made this template here. It's hard to see, but that gap there, when it's sitting in the workshop manual, it says it's 1 inch plus or minus 0.01 of an inch, and that works out around 25.4 millimeters. So once all the bolts are adjusted, they're set with lock compound and marked then with a pen to indicate that each one has been set properly. So the next step now is to push the 2 halves of the tractor together, and hopefully that won't be too much bother trying to get everything to line up. So here we have the tractor pushed back together again. So it's just a matter of lining up the spline shaft, approximately the same as the clutch aligning tool, pushing the 2 halves together and making sure that everything is lining up as you come in together. So what I done here is on the top bolt where the starter is, I put a piece of dowel rod through that hole and let it protrude out so it gives me a good guide to get it all lined up. So once you have that done, then it should go together without any tightening of bolts or anything that together. You should never squeeze the 2 halves together by tightening the bolts, because if you have to do that, there's something not lined up properly. So it should go together by just pushing it, turning each of the wheels on both sides. So it's sort of a 3-man operation to do that. And then once you have everything lined up, I put in all the bolts, tighten them up comfortably, and then took one out at a time, put Loctite on them and torque them up. And as each one is torqued up, it's marked with a yellow marker. So the next step now is to start reconnecting the fuel lines and putting the tin back together on it. But before that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the clutch here on this side, give the tractor a push, and then let out the clutch and make sure that it's engaging and disengaging before I start up the tractor.